Warning, this chapter contains adult content, so to keep the PG-13 rating for the general viewership of this channel, I have removed that part and will be including it in a separate segment for members only. If you wish to listen to it, you may become a member, or if you wish to read it, you can visit the story from the link in the descriptions. Indomitable Heart by Renette. Chapter 4. Obi-Wan woke slowly, warm and content, as he had been every morning he woke in Jango's arms. Jango's large hand had found its way back down Obi-Wan's body in the night and was splayed on his lower belly. He could feel Jango's morning erection pressed against his lower back, and desire swept through him sharply. He was alive. They were both alive. They had survived Death Watch. He'd taken the Darksaber in single combat. They were alive! Obi-Wan let out a shuddering breath at the sudden wash of adrenaline, filtering the emotions, settling halfway into meditation, and letting the Force sweep away the rush of near ecstatic relief. Jango murmured, nuzzling into Obi-Wan's neck. Obi-Wan relaxed, knowing his sudden tension had likely alerted Jango to his wakefulness. Jango was a light sleeper by habit, and it was rare that Obi-Wan could slip from their shared bed without waking him.
"What's got you thinking so odd, Cyar'ika?"
Jango rumbled, voice and accent thick with sleep.
"Just realized how bad yesterday could have been,"
Obi-Wan admitted softly.
"Could have been,"
Jango admitted sleepily.
"But wasn't. You helped make sure it wasn't."
He nosed through the longer hair at Obi-Wan's nape that was usually kept bound back in a short pail, and softly kissed the knob of Obi-Wan's spine.
"You protected your people,"
he praised.
"So beautiful out there, Kal'redul."
Obi-Wan flushed at the praise, pressing back against Jango. Jango growled softly, shifting over Obi-Wan and kissing his neck and jaw, then gently turning Obi-Wan on the mattress so he could kiss Obi-Wan on the mouth. Despite his usual disdain for kissing before he'd brushed his teeth, Obi-Wan opened readily to Jango, kissing him eagerly. Moving slow enough that Obi-Wan could protest if he went too far, Jango skimmed his hands up Obi-Wan's flanks, lifting the thin sleep tunic as he went. Obi-Wan murmured softly, but it wasn't protest. He flushed as Jango lifted the tunic away completely, laying still and open beneath his lover. Jango drank in the sight of his Jedi. Obi-Wan was still a bit coltish with youth, 20 years old and not quite fully grown into himself. He was lean and pale, sparse ginger hair speckling his chest and limbs, growing more thickly beneath his arms and between his legs. Freckles were scattered liberally over his arms and shoulders and back, and dotted his nose and cheeks and forehead where he got more sun. Reddish-brown hair was buzzed short over most of his head, sticking up in every direction. His long Padawan braid trailed down his pale throat, his loosened tail spread on the pillow. A few flaking spots of dried cum clung to his thighs and belly from their love-making the night before. "Master's waiting," Obi-Wan murmured, his cheeks flushed heatedly. He tapped his temple to indicate the communication had been mental. Jango nodded with a wry smile, kneeling up on the bed. He just stared at Obi-Wan for a moment longer, then sighed and patted into the lavish fresher. Obi-Wan followed Jango after a moment, and they danced around each other at the sinks as they washed up, then dressed and went to find Yan in the seating area, an array of filling first meal options spread before him. Obi-Wan settled next to Yan, helping himself to some of the hot cereal cooked from the native narrow grain and sweetening it with honey and fruit. Jango dropped down at Obi-Wan's other side, reaching over him to help himself to some shig. Miles and Silas soon joined them, grunting sleepily in greeting. There was quiet, save the sound of drinking and chewing, as they all took their first mugs of shig and ate their first meal of the day.
"Sukui,"
Jango greeted teasingly when Miles and Silas finally looked up from their plates. Silas glared and Miles made a rude hand gesture. It was one of his most frequent greetings, Obi-Wan had noted with some amusement.
"We're all awake?"
Yan questioned. Obi-Wan thought it likely his master had been up for at least an hour already. He dipped his head, knowing he and Jango had been in bed later than usual that morning. He didn't regret it. Striking a balance between the personal and professional was something he would have to learn as they went along. Now, though, there was work to be done, and Obi-Wan had promised himself that as much as he loved Jango, he wouldn't shirk his responsibilities as a Jedi for anyone.
Yesterday's damage?
Jango asked, directing the question to Miles and Silas. The two Kal'redul-based networks agree on casualty numbers. 23 locals dead, 16 of them not in armor. Another 42 hospitalized, 37 of those not armored, Silas reported. 38 Kurtzad dead, including Pre Vizsla. They estimate at least 20 more have gone to ground in the city. The tournament protectors would welcome our help, Miles pitched in.
So do it,
Jango directed.
I don't like civilians dying for me. I know our patrols have been quietly keeping an eye on the city, but let's step that up. Make sure people know we'll help out if they see something.
Miles nodded.
Obi-Wan, I'd like you to keep on Death Watch too,
Jan suggested as they went over the tasks before them.
Speak with anyone you can about what they saw. Let's try and trail them back to their lair, find out all we can on where they're operating and how. Your Beskar gam is unmarked. If you keep your lightsaber out of sight, people might be more willing to talk to a fellow Mando than a Jedi. I'll remain at your side, Mandalore, and we'll make Obi-Wan's excuses.
Jango nodded. It was a good idea. Most eyes would remain on Jango and the obvious Jedi, allowing Obi-Wan to investigate unimpeded. While he traversed the city that day following leads, Obi-Wan also picked up a few interesting components to add to the gauntlets of his Beskar gam. It had become clear in the fighting that a multitude of useful tools could be added. Jango's gauntlets boasted a liquid cable ascension line on one wrist, a compact missile launcher on the other, along with other surprises for the unwary. The ascension line was something Obi-Wan could easily see the use of, and he wanted to see what else was available. It took a few days of building trust, a few more of quietly and carefully following gossip, but Obi-Wan was soon flushing the local remnants of Death Watch out of their hidey holes. As he did, he gathered what information he could before remanding the members of Death Watch to the local authorities. Keldabe was by that point almost uniformly pro-Hat Mando'a, more of Jango's Aliit having arrived to help keep order and to ensure that supplies were reaching the city properly. The local journeyman protectors gratefully accepted the help, trusting that Jango, as the son of one of their own, would have ensured his Aliit knew how to keep the peace. The more information Obi-Wan gathered, though, the more concerned he became about Death Watch's actions. While part of the motivation behind Death Watch's attacks was their loyalty to the Vizsla clan, there was more. Someone in the shadows had been aiming to destroy both the Hat Mando'a and New Mandalorian factions, and to decimate the Mando people with a drawn-out civil war. Death Watch had been well funded to cause trouble, and they had been promised that once they ascended to primacy, they would have free rein to plunder the galaxy as they willed. Obi-Wan's mind immediately flashed back to those tales of the Mandalorian Crusades, sweeping mercilessly through the galaxy and killing any sentient that stood in their way. He thought of the Jedi Temple, bombed and plundered. He thought of the Sith Wars, with Jedi defecting to the Mando and back again, and hundreds, thousands dying, of the Jedi falling. No, that waylaid madness. Taking down the shadowy director would do a great deal to prevent further attacks. Hints of the being Obi-Wan mentally dubbed the Shadow Master weren't the only intriguing finds he scraped together out of what he found in Death Watch hideouts. He found the names and information of a number of monetary supporters of Death Watch. While not a crime in and of itself, it could be argued that supporting Death Watch was in fact contracting the deaths of innocents, something anathema to the Super Commando Codex that the Hat Mando'a and many other Mando'a lived by. It was in his second week of hunting down Death Watch members who had gone to ground that Obi-Wan first discovered mention of a secret holding facility on Concordia, where the Vizsla clan had their power base. Jango immediately glowered when Obi-Wan shared the information during their now nightly debrief. Obi-Wan could feel his lover's righteous anger. Neither Clan Vizsla nor Death Watch had any right, save that of might, to hold others prisoner.
How much do we actually know?
Silas asked as Jango began the pace.
Rumors? Obi-Wan said, shaking his head. Speculation.
It will be like them, though,
Jango said, and Obi-Wan shrugged. Jango turned to Miles. Lorne? Miles asked preemptively.
Yeah, have him start digging. Any help he needs, give it to him,
Jango directed. Until they knew more, there wasn't much they could do. He paced a little longer, then sat back down, next to Obi-Wan, who had partially disassembled one of his gauntlets and was carefully fitting in a small shielded compartment where he could carry extra lightsaber components. Talks the next few days were tenser than they had been since the first few days. Obi-Wan spent more time in the city asking questions, pushing his informants to be more forthcoming about what might or might not be happening on Concordia. Between the more anecdotal tales he brought and what Lorne was able to slice, they concluded that the rumors of a detention block at the Vizsla compound were almost certainly grounded in fact, with the more than slight possibility of Death Watch having hot Mando'a as prisoners from past skirmishes between the factions. Jango was unwilling to wait until the potentially complicit journeyman protectors on Concordia took action. He would lead his clan to retrieve any lost members himself.
So you won't be in talks?
Dooku asked, and Jango smiled thinly.
I'll be there tomorrow. It'll take us a little time to pull a raid together, but as soon as we get that figured out, no, I won't be in Nox.
I'll let Qui-Gon know something has come up in the clan that may draw you away from the negotiating table for a few days.
Silas can negotiate on my behalf,
Jango said, dipping his head at his second. Silas wrinkled his nose, but didn't argue. He was the more cool-tempered of Jango's seconds, and often acted as a check on both Jango's and Miles' more impulsive urges.
No?
Jango asked and turned to the slicer. The gray-green skilled Twi'lek looked up.
Find any floor plans?
Lorne grinned, then tapped at their datapad. A hollow of a wire-frame schematic appeared.
The contractor who built their basement should be ashamed of his security measures,
Lorne said with mock sympathy. Jango grinned in turn, stepping closer and looking at the rotating image. Carved into an abandoned mine shaft, the detention block was fairly small, likely not holding more than a dozen prisoners at a time, they concluded. There were 10 cells sealed with ray shields and monitored by security droids, with a manned security station at the sole entrance, a lift that exited to the compound barracks. The barracks could hold at least 50 fighters, and the Vizsla family's residential area could house at least 20 more. That didn't account for temporary barracks erected in the surrounding area either.
Based on the power grid, they have some serious weaponry,
Silas offered from where he was looking through some of the other data Lorne had collected for them.
Probably wall guns, although our sensor masking should keep them blind until we're in visual range,
Jango said.
They have a lot of room there, but given how many of them died here a few days ago and on Kal'redul, I doubt there are more than 25 or 30 fighters in that compound. If we can get better numbers than an estimate, though, that would be good. I don't want to take everyone we have here. We need to have room on Justice Legacy to evac whoever we find there, and I also don't want to leave the city and hotel without our presence as a secondary defense.
You'll want the Rusans,
Silas guessed, naming 2 of their best battlefield medics, Rusan Aver and Rusan Rook. Jango nodded, then looked at Miles.
I'll see if I can find anything on numbers, Lorne said. Give me until tomorrow night.
Jango nodded.
Tap the Rusans, and Lorne, you're with us too. We'll need the best electronic countermeasures we can scramble, and as much of their data as we can slice,
Jango directed.
We'll decide the rest tomorrow night, hopefully with a better handle on numbers.
Miles nodded, tapping at his comm to message the other hot Mando'a on planet to give them a heads up. The other hot Mando'a nodded too, and after copying their data over, Lorne excused himself and returned to their room to keep poking at the HoloNet. Miles, Silas, and Jango pored over the schematics for some time, and Obi-Wan listened as they discussed what they might find given aspects of Concordia's terrestrial features, the architecture of the compound, the water and power readings on file, and myriad other factors. While they discussed, he finished upgrading his gauntlets, liquid cable line, dagger, and a few secret compartments for now, although there was space to make further changes if he desired. After another tense day of talks, Jango and Obi-Wan returned directly to their suite. Miles, Silas, and Lorne were already there and had set up the holotable with Lorne's in-series information droid joining them.
Numbers?
Django asked, foregoing polite greetings.
Probably in the mid-20s, not more than 30 fighters max, Lorne said. There are other small groups of fighters out in the mines, but if we accomplish a quiet in and out, they won't be able to get reinforcements in from the outlying areas.
Django nodded.
We can easily match that,
Silas said, tapping his comm to show the list of volunteers. Nearly every hot Mando'a with them in Gedalbe would be happy to make the trip to Concordia. The door opened and everyone looked over wearily. It was Rusan and Rusan, though. While the two women shared a first name common among the Mando'a, they differed in physical appearance. Rusan Aver was a tall, dark-skinned human, with her tightly braided black hair dyed a retina-searing blue. Rusan Rook was much shorter, with ruddy skin and vestigial horn buds on her forehead proclaiming her Devaronian ancestry. Her dark hair was cut short and beginning to gray at the temples.
Ne parvu takisit,
Aver apologized in greeting, and Django nodded, then turned back to the projected schematics.
All right,
Django said.
5 teams of 5. Miles, Lorne, Rusan, and Rusan will lead the other squads. Obi-Wan is with me.
He shifted his gaze back to the list of volunteers.
I'll also take Je, Vel, and Fen. It'll be a fairly short hop-up. We go in as quiet as we can, deplane at altitude, and take out the wall guns all the way down. Miles, you and your team will stay aloft to run countermeasures.
Miles nodded, mentally picking his own squad from among the volunteers. He would pilot Jaster's Legacy, and he would want a skilled co-pilot, gunners, and a comms and sensors stack on his team. The others would pick their squads based on the tasks Django assigned. It wasn't hard to guess that Lorne's team would mostly be doing data retrieval, and the medics would lead the evacuation of prisoners.
Once we're on the ground, we'll break into squads, fan out so we can get what we're going for, and get going as quickly as possible. Lorne?
Data?
Yes, but give me the best estimate of prisoners.
10 max. Only 5 cells have their ray shields in use, and they're sized for 2 sentients in a cell.
All right. Ava, Rook, you're evacuating prisoners once you get down there. Get inside as quick as you can in case they decide to use the prisoners as hostages. Lorne, data. Find it, copy it, and keep your comm on in case anyone needs technical help. I'll go after the leadership.
The others all nodded, and the team leaders began hashing out who they would take on their teams. Aver and Rook both wanted fighters well-versed in first aid, Lorne wanting those with better-than-average data retrieval skills. The next morning, Django and Obi-Wan both dressed in full Beskar, and they and the selected Hot Mando'a super commandos boarded Jaster's Legacy, headed for Concordia. The trip only took a few hours, and they spent them going over the intelligence they had on the Vizsla compound, highlighting potential paths through the structure to their objectives. It was a simple, rectangular layout with the family residence at the north end, barracks at the south end, and training grounds and a small hangar in between. The hangar was too small for anything interstellar, likely housing only speeders or air cars. The entrance to the detention block was under the barracks, which were built over an old mine. Silence descended as Jaster's Legacy settled into orbit over Concordia and opened up the long-range sensors, simultaneously beginning electronic countermeasures to mask their presence. The super commandos went over their armor compulsively, double and triple checking seals and weapons and jetpacks. Obi-Wan did the same, fidgeting his 2 lightsabers in his hands. His bright blue-bladed saber had been built for a two-handed grip rather than Cyar'ika, although Obi-Wan was proficient in dual-wielding. Going into battle with the darksaber in his offhand was terribly symbolic, though, and he had meditated with the weapon enough that he was comfortable using it. The crystal had somewhat begrudgingly accepted him, understanding that it would be used to both protect Mandalore and bring justice in the wider galaxy. As wind speed and altitude readouts from the shipboard scanners filtered into the displays in their helmets, the Hot Mando'a readied themselves for atmospheric entry. Jaster's Legacy flew straight towards the Vizsla compound, beginning evasive maneuvers when they were in visual range of a battery of large guns. Miles piloted carefully to avoid the worst of the anti-aircraft fire, the rest of the ship-assigned squad assisting as needed, the gunners targeting shield and gun emplacements, the comm and sensor tech monitoring local frequencies and keeping them invisible to scanning. As soon as they hit the ceiling for halo jumps, Super Commandos lined up near the ramp to deplane.
Ready?
Jango asked Obi-Wan, and Obi-Wan swallowed thickly, then nodded, clicking their helmeted foreheads together.
Koyashi!
Obi-Wan replied. Jango gave a nod, and then he and Jango were deplaning, almost in tandem, free-falling for a while before firing their jetpacks. The Super Commandos launched themselves out after their leader. In their helmets, the sliced schematic overlaid the rectangular compound below, along with the sensor information from the ship pinpointing clusters of heat signatures. When they were in range, the locations of the guns lit up, and the Super Commandos used the missiles on their jetpacks to take out the outer defenses before they even reached the ground. A few more volleys collapsed the hangar, pinning down any vehicles housed there. A speeder sitting outside the hangar door went up in a ball of flame. While Obi-Wan had made a few test flights, this was his first high-altitude jump with a jetpack. Adrenaline scored through him, and he fought the urge to laugh giddily, keeping himself in a mission mindset. His landing wasn't as good as some of the others, despite his ability to use the Force. He didn't quite have the timing down on when to cut the thrusters. Still, he landed when and where he was supposed to, without any broken bones, and then they were breaching the walls and fighting their way into the compound. Obi-Wan's blasters remained holstered on his thighs, leaving his hands free to dual-wield the darksaber and the lightsaber he had created when he became Yan's Padawan. The plasma blades were both offense and defense, deflecting any blaster bolt in the area back towards the Death Watch Partizans who fired at them. As they broke open the compound, the hot Mando'a fractured into their smaller assigned groups, some making for the detention block and the fighters that guarded it, others going to find data suites and slicing as much information as they could. Overhead, Jaster's Legacy ran a suite of electronic countermeasures, jamming all of Death Watch communications so they couldn't call for backup. Obi-Wan stuck himself on Jango's shoulder and followed him into the depths of the fortress, their 3 squad mates following behind. They would be looking for whoever was in charge. They found the leader in a well-fortified war room with a few others. The slight alterations in Beskar suggested that Clan Vizsla was now led by their matriarch. Whoever they were, they didn't allow Jango and Obi-Wan to speculate long. Blaster fire was soon being exchanged rapidly between Jango and the Death Watch commander. Obi-Wan, although he trusted well enough in the sturdiness of their Beskar, wasn't shy about deflecting anything that came close to his lover. The other hot Mando'a made short work of their Death Watch counterparts. In the end, Jango managed to shoot the Death Watch commander in the throat, capitalizing on the flaw in many modern Beskar. Obi-Wan extinguished his sabers a few moments after the blaster fire stopped, then went to the data suite and began loading all he could onto the data chips he'd brought with him. Over their comms, he could hear the battlefield chatter of the rest of the troops, calling out adversaries and celebrating their downfall. Anyone in armor was fair game by their rules of engagement, and from what Obi-Wan had been told by Jango, those rules were far stricter than those by which Death Watch operated. Obi-Wan wasn't terribly surprised. It was no secret that unarmed civilians had died during the Death Watch assault on Kel'Dabe.
Alor,
Ruusan Aver said, cutting through the fading chatter. Got something here you need to see. There was a grim urgency to her voice, and Jango immediately straightened from his half-slouch near the door, where he was keeping watch. Go ahead, Obi-Wan signaled with his hands. He still had plenty of data to slice, not sure if the data in Central Command would be accessible from whatever terminal Lorne had hooked into, and he didn't need Jango to watch over him. Their 5-being team could be easily split. Jango nodded, then signaled to one of the others to follow before he freed his weapons and jogged from the room. Obi-Wan spared a thought to hope that all would be well. The Force was muddy and shadowed with the day's violence, giving no hints at what might be wrong. Then he buried himself in the data once more.
Clear,
Obi-Wan announced into the squad's comm frequency when he'd stored all the data he could download. The other 2 nodded, and they swept one more time through their area, making sure they weren't leaving any enemies at their backs.
Clear,
Obi-Wan announced again when they were satisfied, this time to the frequency used by the entire team.
Report to the training area,
Ruusan Rook directed.
You can help us get evac ready.
Copy, Obi-Wan agreed, and he and his remaining squad mates returned to the open space at the center of the compound, each of them carrying the body of a fallen Death Watch partisan over their shoulders. They'd found Lorne's and Rook's teams already there, guarding a dozen surrendered Death Watch partisans, 4 newly freed prisoners able to move under their own power, and 2 on stretchers. It took a few more trips to carry out the bodies, which would go into cold storage for the trip back to Kildare and be turned over to the authorities there.
Go for landing sequence,
Ava reported over the comm not long after Obi-Wan and his team arrived. Her squad came out first, escorting 3 more former prisoners. Ava, Jango, and the Mando, who had gone with him earlier, came out last, Ava guiding a floating stretcher. Per the original plan, Obi-Wan and his squad mates powered up the jetpacks, taking overwatch position. Jaster's legacy set down with a wash of hot air, ramp lowering. The injured commandos and newly freed prisoners were loaded first, then the captured members of Death Watch were loaded on. Obi-Wan knew they would be well secured, then turned over to the journeyman protectors in Kildare. Bodies were loaded last. The ship took off, and once they were clear of the walls, Obi-Wan and the hot Mando'a flying escort boarded, then closed the ramp. Obi-Wan found Jango in the med bay as they headed back to Kildare. Jango sat alongside a mostly curtained-off bed, the woman inside unrecognizable under heavy bandaging. When Obi-Wan pulled off his bouquet, the sweet fruity scent of bacta flooded his nose. Scuffing his feet slightly to ensure he didn't surprise Jango, Obi-Wan approached, tapping his gauntlet against Jango's shoulder pauldron before resting his hand on Jango's shoulder. Jango reached up, taking hold of Obi-Wan's hand for a moment. His other hand was bare and clasped the woman's hand tightly.
"Who is she?"
Obi-Wan asked.
"According to the logs, my sister."